Good morning and welcome to the 21st meeting of the Education, Children and Young People Committee in 2025. The first item on our agenda is to seek the committee's agreement to take item 4 on consideration of a legislative consent memorandum in private. Is the committee agreed? That is agreed. Joe Fitzpatrick is not with us today, so can I welcome Claire Hawkey, who is attending as the substitute member. The next item of business is evidence from a panel of witnesses on the financial sustainability of Scotland's colleges. And can I welcome to the meeting Angela Cox, Chair, College Principals Group, and Andy Whitty, Director of Strategic Policy and Corporate Governance, College of Scotland, Joanna Campbell, Principal and Chief Executive of Glasgow Kelvin College, Professor Wayne Powell, Principal and Chief Executive of Scotland's Rural College, and Vicky Nairn, Principal and Vice-Chancellor, University of the Highlands and Islands. Welcome to you all to the committee. Can I start off, Mr Whitty and Ms Cox, with you? We had ministers in front of us at the start of the year discussing the budget, and they felt the budget delivered by the Scottish Government was good for Scotland's colleges, but Colleges Scotland had told the committee that the budget was deeply disappointing for Scotland's 24 colleges. The sector's call for greater investment had been overlooked. The shortfall will have far-reaching implications for Scotland's economic recovery, and the funding cuts poses significant challenges. So who's right? Is it Colleges Scotland who said that, or the ministers who said this was a good budget for the college sector? Mr Whitty.
Thank you. Good morning. And thanks, Convener. I would take the committee back to the Audit Scotland report, which showed a 17% real terms reduction in funding over the last 3 years. Their next report is due out, I believe, in October. And given the real terms reduction since then, I would suspect the figure is going to be around 20% of real term reduction. So that's £1 in every 5 that's removed from the college sector. I mean, that's also on the back of the, when you look at the level of funding between different parts of the education system, the colleges are less per head than any other part of the college system. And what's important to remember here is that this is about educating people to grasp the opportunities of work and to skill up and to reskill and to return to work, which is around helping the economy and also helping individuals out of poverty. And so the opportunities that are there, I mean, we heard only yesterday at a workshop I was at of the £230 billion of potential investment in Scotland. There was a recent Scotland 2050 conference, which just this week heard about the massive skills gap. And so what we're looking at here is to gain stability for the college sector and then sustainability so that it can help young people grasp those opportunities, older people grasp those opportunities to help the economy and help lift people out of poverty.
So I should have also said we've got a big panel and a lot of members, so if we can be succinct with questions and answers, but also I won't expect everyone to answer every question. But just to go back to my point, the Cabinet Secretary told this committee that the funding for in the budget provides adequate resources to Scotland's colleges. She agreed with that statement. Do Colleges Scotland agree with the Cabinet Secretary that the current budget that you've been given is adequate?
So we would want to see some of that 17% real terms cut reinvested back into the sector. So we need to see more finance into the sector, but we can also streamline different elements of the sector around apprenticeships, where only in some of the frameworks 40% of the funding that leaves Scottish Government reaches the college that actually does the training. So there's opportunities there for additional finances to be brought in. If you look at the figures where Audit Scotland again said that 11 of the 14 colleges that they had information for at the time were going to be in deficit. A recent report has updated that. It's now 17 out of 20 colleges at the time for that particular year. And the Scottish Funding Council produced a report in January 2024, which was showing the increasing reduction of cash held by colleges, and indeed by July 2026 they predicted there would be a deficit of cash, the college sector as a whole would run out of money. So I think these reports paint a reasonable and reliable picture of where the finances of the college sector are, which is not in a good state.
So, Ms Cox, I mean, what is the situation on the ground with college principals when budgets have been very tight and look to be getting tighter?
So I'm not going to repeat everything that Andy says. I think over the last few years, colleges have been saying that we were reaching a bit of a precipice. I would say that we are now over that precipice and we're hanging on by our fingernails. So you're absolutely right, it was a 2% increase, but actually that is a real-term cut. And the lack of investment in colleges over the last, I would say, 5 years plus, has meant that we are now in a very fragile state. We talk a lot about the learning and teaching budget, but I think we also need to think about our infrastructure, which has been underinvested in for a long time, and actually it's a postcode lottery, depending on the quality of the experience you have as a student. When you come to college, we've got colleges who have buckets in corridors and classrooms catching rainwater. We have colleges who have had to close buildings because of a lack of investment in RAC, and we're unable to invest in the way that we should be able to invest for the future skills requirement that Scotland needs, and we all understand what those are, but also to achieve our net zero ambitions. So we recognise that we have to change, and we have to change rapidly, but we need infrastructure investment to support that transformation.
Okay, before I continue my questions, that brings us nicely to a point that John Mason wants to make. So I'll pass over to John Mason.
Thanks so much. Well, I was interested in the capital funding because I'd gathered that, well, I assume that different colleges are facing different challenges as to how much they have. I mean, can you give us any figures about the need for, say, RAC or cladding repairs?
We're waiting for the infrastructure baselining report from the SFC. Andy might be able to give you some further detail around that, but our own estimations as a sector, not the SFC estimation, is that that's going to be near on £1 billion between the backlog in maintenance costs and what we need to do to reach net zero and transform our campuses. Yeah,
the SFC gave us figures, I think, which, so for example, this 25-26, that they've split the capital maintenance funding and also the like new projects, and so it's 34.5 million for capital maintenance, 30 million for project funding. So are you saying that we're talking about £1 billion? I mean, that's just nowhere near.
It's loose change compared to what we need.
Yes.
Yeah, so, Andy, you...
Yeah. I mean, so Angela's right. We're waiting for the capital infrastructure investment plan based on that last baseline. That was due to be published earlier this year. We're still awaiting that. The previous information that we have was from 2017, where there was a college estate survey done, recognising about £360 million of investment needed just to make buildings wind and watertight. So that's the buckets that Angela's talking about, which is some of the really poor conditions students need to be learning in today. Of that, Audit Scotland, again, can take you back to one of their reports that says of that necessary investment, there was a shortfall of £321 million in backlog maintenance just to make buildings wind and watertight. But
I mean, it's not really necessary, is it?
That 2017 report was split into 5 categories, with essentially health and safety compliance being the top category, and then urgent need. And these, the shortfall was in those higher categories. So it is absolutely needed, this investment in the college estate.
Okay, I mean, Ms Campbell, if I can take an individual college as an example, because we're not got everybody here, but I mean, can you say what capital challenges your college is facing?
Yes, thank you and good morning everybody. So we have it's estimated at 8.2 million historical cladding issue that we need to address in our Springburn campus. And it's not RAC, it's to do with the way in which the building was constructed, but we're awaiting a final engineering assessment on that. But nonetheless, what we're budgeting for over the next 4 years is how we address that shortfall. Now, at the moment, we have sold one of our campuses and we're in discussions with the Funding Council about retention of the capital receipts, and helpfully the Minister has secured provision for colleges to retain 70% of the capital receipts from sale of any assets. And we are planning to use money that we have in our Arm's Length Foundation, but nonetheless that leaves us with a gap of £5 million. Now, as I say, we're budgeting for that. Whether or not we'll be able to achieve that from our own resources, highly unlikely, but what I can say is that this has an impact on the facilities that we're able to provide our students, so it has a significant impact on learning and teaching going forward. And we're not able to make improvements that we would like to make because all resource that we have goes into trying to address this shortfall, which has come about through no fault of our own.
Okay, and Professor Powell, I think you mentioned financial transactions money in your submission. Can you just explain to us how you were using that and why it's got lost or whatever?
So, thank you for the question. I think, first of all, in terms of SRUC, for context, our estate spans about 150,000 square metres. That's equivalent to a third of 40% of the University of Glasgow, so we have an extensive estate. The transaction funding that we've obtained have supported a number of important improvements. These are loans, and they've been vital for us to be able to sustain our infrastructure. And that's against a backlog maintenance sum of about 70 million. So, for example, we've used our transaction funding to support the development on King's buildings. We've used it to support developments in Craibson and in other campuses across SRUC.
Okay, well, I'll leave it at that just now. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you very much. Ms Nairn, as a Highlands and Islands MSP, I'm obviously very keen to look at the issues around UHI, which go wider than obviously just the Highlands and Islands and the situation we've seen in Perth recently. But there's no doubt that UHI and the colleges have been going through challenging and turbulent times. What responsibility do you have for some of the issues that have arisen as Principal and Vice-Chancellor?
Thank you and good morning, everybody. So I have two roles in terms of my PVC role. Obviously, I'm Principal and Vice-Chancellor of the University Partnership. I am also the Chief Officer of the Regional Strategic Body, and that effectively acts as a mini funding council in terms of its responsibilities for managing funding that comes from the Scottish Government, but also ensuring outcomes and performance. We work very closely with our partners, our academic partners, who are a mixture of colleges, research institutions. We also have one local authority partner, UHI Orkney. And so the university is responsible for academic quality and academic delivery and making sure that actually our learners get the right outcomes we need. The colleges, and it depends which college we would be talking about, but the individual colleges, their boards and their principals and chief executives, who are the accountable officers, are responsible for the day-to-day running of the colleges and ensuring that they meet things like budget and deal with operational issues.
Page 40 of your financial report and financial statements for 2024 says the University Court is responsible for assessing the group's and the parent institution's ability to continue as a going concern. So what responsibility do you have with the situation that we saw in Perth recently, where the principal has lost her job? Do you bear any responsibility for the situation there, or was that wholly, in your view, a local issue that you couldn't have been aware of?
So the RSB has responsibility for making sure that the colleges perform under a financial memorandum that we have with all of our academic partners. As part of that, that holds the board to account. So in the situation describing in UHI Perth, when we were aware that the principal had resigned, and obviously she tendered her resignation to the board, not to ourselves, we then engaged with the Funding Council and the board to make sure that there was some appropriate leadership and management in place. So our role really is one of monitoring, scrutiny and oversight. And when necessary, we will put in sort of special measures in terms of reporting.
But where's the monitoring, scrutiny and oversight before a principal has to resign? I was quite struck by you saying that, I mean, you knew she was going to resign. There was a lot of focus on that. So you didn't just know when the letter was handed in to her board. But what about the steps leading up to her taking a big decision to resign, someone who's worked with UHI for many, many years? Where's the scrutiny by the RSB and the court before it gets to that stage?
So I didn't know that Dr Cook was going to resign until she chose to do so. That was her decision. And we regularly report on academic partners' financial positions, financial sustainability. There are reports presented to every UHI court meeting, and they are monitored and scrutinised. They also go to the University's Finance and General Purposes Committee. In turn, those reports should have been seen by their own board of the academic partners, who should be supplying their own scrutiny, because the boards of management of an academic partner, so say UHI Perth, are ultimately responsible for the financial sustainability of that organisation and taking some of the decisions that they need to make to ensure that is the case.
So you're saying this was all the responsibility of the individual college, the principal and the board, and nothing to do with you as principal and vice-chancellor or the RSB? I'm
saying the primary responsibility lies with the board of that academic partner. So in this case, UHI Perth.
So what about your responsibility?
Our responsibility is to work very closely with them and to provide an interface between the Funding Council, the university and the academic partners, and also to support our academic partners as well. In the case of UHI Perth, we had a number of changes and the RSB needed to intervene to make sure that actually the Funding Council were appropriately briefed under our procedures, and also make sure that in terms of myself, I was working with the interim chair and the rest of the board and making sure that they had the resources in place to discharge their duties.
So the RSB can intervene?
We can.
But you didn't until it got to a critical point that the college was reporting millions of pounds of losses, a very difficult financial situation, and the principal was on the cusp of resigning?
Well, as I mentioned, we monitor academic partners' financial sustainability on a regular basis.
So when did you first see that there was problems at Perth?
So we started, well, Perth isn't alone because, as has already been said.
I understand that, but I'm looking at Perth at the moment. So I'm just trying to understand. I mean, you've got a very grand title, you hold a very high office, and with that comes responsibility. And so far, you know, a lot of the issues you put on to the local college, the principal and the board, there must be some ultimate responsibility with you and the RSB.
So the RSB is ultimately accountable to the Scottish Funding Council for reporting on the performance of the colleges and making sure that the colleges discharge appropriate due governance. In terms of when we engage with UHI Perth, that has been a continual process. So as part of our ongoing reporting to University Court and its committees, we have been reporting, certainly ever since I've been in post, on academic partner financial sustainability, including UHI Perth.
But I was asking more specifically, when were you first aware of the problems Perth was facing?
Well, Perth has been facing sustainability problems for a number of years. So I would say it's been a deteriorating position over the last couple of years.
So what have you and the RSB done to try and resolve that?
So we've been working very closely with them. We've been working with them in the Funding Council. So, for instance, when they needed their voluntary severance scheme approving, we worked with them. They made some changes to their staffing profile. We've also had a board observer on their board of management to try and provide advice and guidance. But ultimately, the responsibility for the financial sustainability of that institution rests with the Board of Management and the Chair of the Board of Management.
So when you say you've been working very closely with them, given what we've now seen at UHI Perth, would you say you've failed in terms of seeking to help them, given the situation they're now in, the savings they now have to make, and the loss of a long-serving principal? Did the RSB fail?
No, I don't think so. I think
so
the
was it a success then to be in the situation that Perth is in?
I think fail and success are very black and white words when we live in a climate of a very difficult funding position. So Perth and all colleges are trying to make ends meet with a real-time reduction of roughly 20% year on year. Because we work to one-year budgets and we're trying to do longer-term planning, it is really difficult. So the position changes all of the time. So I would say that the RSB and all colleagues are doing the very best they can in a very difficult climate to actually keep the lights on in some cases.
Okay. Just briefly explain what the top slice is for the funding for the Executive Office.
So when UHI was formed, I often think of it like an umbrella with the university overarching across the top, and then the individual academic partners were sort of formed as part of that. And in order to fund the university and the RSB, a top slice was taken. So when we get the funding from the Funding Council, we take a figure that comes off there, and it's a historical legacy position, which in my mind is very cumbersome and is something that needs to be changed. The rest of the funding then goes to the colleges.
So cumbersome in a way that the colleges can no longer afford it?
Well, because, you know, the top slice in the university, effectively, in a declining funding climate, means there's less money for everybody. Because the university is predominantly driven by HE recruitment and HE numbers, that's where our funding comes from. Any change to that, and UHI did have a declining HE position up until recently, HE recruitment position, means that all parts of UHI have been squeezed. In terms of it going forward, we need a different funding model for UHI. We've embarked on a transformation journey linked to our 2030 strategy, which was launched in 2023, and we want to change the way we operate. Collectively, the partnership wants to change the way it operates, and one of those things will be having a different charging mechanism and a different way of calculating overhead costs.
I want to come back to the top slice then, but just because you mentioned HE, you said it was a declining situation until recently. What are your current HE places and the projections for this year?
So we are currently around about 5,800. Our higher education recruitment is in mid-process right now, but our applications are looking positive. We're currently up by 18%. Obviously, that's applications, not enrolments, but we are putting a lot of effort into recruiting higher education numbers. Obviously, that position, if you've heard in previous committees, is tricky because of the impact of the loss of international students. So it means that all higher education institutions in Scotland are chasing as many home students as possible.
But you said it was declining until recently. I've seen the figures that show it was a couple of years ago up at 6,500. It fell to 5,500, and there's now a paper I've seen that projects it will be 5,360. So you're actually saying it will be an 18% increase on applications on 5.8. Are you saying this 5,360 figure is wrong?
No, I'm saying that 5.8-ish, 5.834, I think, is the number that we're working on for our budgeting right now. So I don't know if you've got the up-to-date figures, convener, because we're actually doing this process right now. But that figure would represent 18% increase.
So it won't be 5,360. You're confident on that?
We're very hopeful that we'll convert those applications into enrolments.
But that's still down from 6,500
yes,
a couple of years ago. And you said it's been declining until recently. It's still declining.
We believe we've turned the corner and we're increasing our HE recruitment. Certainly applications would show that. I think it's worth reflecting on the impact of the pandemic and that had on UHI. UHI lost a lot of market share during the pandemic, and it wasn't necessarily best placed to have a different strategy for recruiting students during the pandemic. So we are very much recovering from that. And once you lose a student, you continue to lose them for 4 years because of their HE cycle. So we are confident that we are recruiting, and we have a lot of resources at the moment dedicated to recovering the HE position.
Going back to the Executive Office in the top slides, what's the figure you get every year from these colleges who are struggling financially to provide funding for your Executive Office?
We take 35%
Yeah. So
at
what's
the
the figure?
moment.
15 million?
Roundabout. No. I'll have to come back to you on that. I don't have the figure to hand.
I personally like figures at this committee. I think you would surely know how much your Executive Office has to spend. If it's not 15 million, is it 14 million?
That's our total budget, and we take a percentage of that. I'll have to come back to you on that figure.
What do you mean? I mean, are you saying 35% is not 14 or 15 million?
I'll come back to you on those figures, Convener. Thank you.
Well, what do you think it is roughly? This is the money you spend running your operation.
So our total budget for the university is around about 135 million. The budget for Executive Office is around about 15 million.
That's what I said. You told me that was wrong. So it is 15 million.
Mm-hmm.
So why did you tell me that was wrong and you didn't know the figure?
Apologies, Convener, I made a mistake.
That's quite a big mistake. So you do have the figure available. You could have answered the question.
Apologies, Convener, I made a mistake.
Okay. Of the 15 million, how much is in administration?
I don't have the breakdown.
Is it 8.5 million?
I don't have the breakdown of those figures here today, Convener. I'll be happy to provide them to you.
I'll press you again because you said you didn't know the figure and you do. So is it could it be 8.5 million?
I will need to check those figures and come back to you, Convener. I don't have the breakdown of all of our departments here today.
Okay. Would it be 2.3 million for academic support, roughly?
I can't comment on that, Convener. I'll have to come back to you with the exact breakdown. I wouldn't like to give you the wrong information.
Okay. On academic support, would you accept that academic support is also provided by the colleges, so there is a duplication in terms of what you provide through Executive Office and the top slice you've taken from the colleges to provide a function that they're also providing locally?
So the university is responsible for academic quality. So within the university, we provide the services of academic quality and research quality. We also have deans of functions who work with our colleges to set the curriculum. And what we're trying to do at the moment is understand through the change programme whether there is any duplication and whether there is areas where we can reduce costs. For instance, in our faculties, understanding where there's overlap. And obviously we have both HE and FE curriculum as well. So unlike perhaps a more traditional university, we provide both and obviously articulation between the two.
Okay, but there is a duplication then if the colleges are providing it locally and you're taking money that the colleges have to give you to provide a function that they're already providing.
We're mapping that at the moment to understand could there be duplication, and I would say that within UHI and the colleges it is a very complex structure, one that certainly before I came to work at UHI I hadn't seen before, and it's a legacy structure in terms of how UHI was formed, and it's worked, but actually it needs to change, and that's why we've embarked on our transformation programme.
Okay, just quickly, because a lot of other members need to get in. Is it right that you've laid off about 40 staff within the Executive Office because colleges have been losing staff, so you've led from the front and lost about 40 staff?
We have lost, I can't remember the exact number because it's just changed, but it's around about 52.
Okay, and what's been the saving?
Around about 5.5 million.
So of your 15 million, it was over 20 million?
No, it depends on the other costs that are coming in all the time, but the total savings that we have taken out of Executive Office in the last couple of years have been about 5.5 million in total. And that's a mixture of staffing and non-staffing. Staffing from memory is about 3.8.
So you think you saved 3.8 million? And we'll see that from your accounts. So there'll be a 3.8 million reduction in the Executive Office staffing funding.
I don't know how it will be portrayed in the accounts, but certainly there'll be a note in the accounts with exploratory information.
Okay. What's the overall deficit forecast for UHI?
Partnership as a total, around about 11 million.
Yeah, so it's 10 to 11 million, and the Executive Office takes in 15 million from the colleges. If they didn't have to lose that top slice, the UHI wouldn't be in a financial deficit. Is that correct?
Potentially. There are lots of other factors in terms of why colleges are in deficit. We've referred to some of them in terms of some of the RAC figures, for instance, and some of the infrastructure costs. I think, you know, because obviously it's your constituency. We have a university, a tertiary university, which covers 2/3 of Scotland's landmass. So that university has to be funded somehow. You either fund it separately or you fund it through another mechanism. And as I said, the legacy mechanism that we've had is the top slice. And I, for one, feel that it is an old legacy. It's not effective. We all have to be leaner going forward, and we all have to look to eradicate duplication. So we're actively doing that now. We've recently started 4 Pathfinder projects on key areas such as student recruitment, shared services, income generation, and all of those things to understand where we can be more effective and efficient.
I'd love to go into some of the issues around the transformation board, because there's challenges with that as well. I would just say I've been given a lot of this information by your colleges from across the UHI, because they don't feel they've had answers to these questions. And I think what we've heard today is there's a lot more to be done. And I think I welcome your commitment, particularly to look at that top slice, because it's been raised in the Chamber with the Minister, particularly around Perth. But all of your colleges are providing a significant amount of money to Executive Office, and from what they're telling me, they're not seeing a return on that. So I do welcome the fact that will be looked at going forward. I'll move now to Bill Kidd.
Yes, thank you, Convener, and thank you, everyone. Just to ask, which there might be a number of viewpoints, or they might all be very similar. In terms of the stresses and strains which there are financially on colleges and universities, etc., how well are colleges and universities, or could they be, working together on a national and regional basis? And UHI and SRUC have got unusual models, but could those models then be developed to spread across the country? Would that help? Yep, Angela.
I think what we need to recognise is the diversity of the sector and the diversity of the landscape of Scotland. So there isn't a single model that would work right across the piece, but there are good emerging models of collaboration. Joanna might want to speak about the sort of Greater Glasgow collaboration. Certainly in Edinburgh and South East, there's some potential collaboration work there which allows them to address the needs of the economy, but in an efficient and joined up way. In other regions, if I talk about Ayrshire, we're a single college region across 3 local authorities. We work closely with UWS. We're working increasingly closely with Enmis and Strathclyde University to address the needs of Ayrshire. So it's a different picture across the landscape. But for all of those things to really be addressed, we need investment to support that transformation. Because all of this has been done at the side of a desk at the moment with a lack of project funding and investment to make that transition.
Okay. Joanna, do you want to say something?
Yes, I'm happy to come in on that. So Glasgow is 5th largest city in the UK. It's the economic powerhouse for Scotland. So if you take the 3 colleges in Glasgow, they provide 22% of all college provision in Scotland. If you take the wider Glasgow region, the 6 colleges provide 44% of college activity in Scotland. So it stands to reason that whatever happens in Glasgow has a significant effect on our economic prosperity. The difficulty for us in Glasgow is that our price per credit is amongst the lowest in the sector. So, you know, we're left wondering, why would the Scottish Government not invest in one of the largest areas in Scotland to the extent that it invests in other areas, rural colleges, for example. And I say that having come from a rural college previously. But what I can tell you is that in Glasgow, we work together very closely. We plan curriculum together to address different aspects of what we do across the region, but also that we have a different focus. So, for example, in my college, 40% of our student population is from SIMD 10 postcodes, which means that the work that we do has a direct impact on the life chances of those individuals in tackling areas such as child poverty, social mobility, widening access, whereas if you take a college like City of Glasgow, their focus is very much on higher national provision and international provision and that whole sort of broader tertiary piece. So I think what I'm trying to say in response to your question there is that colleges in Glasgow specifically, we do work together closely and we make sure that whatever we do is done in a very planned and coordinated manner.
And thank you very much. And Professor Wayne, please.
Thank you, Mr. Kidd. It's a timely question. My view on this is that we should be acting really boldly at the moment. I think it's time for real innovation. I think going back to the theme that the conveners laid at the start of this meeting, this is about shifting the dialogue and culture from funding to investment and how we deliver on what Scotland needs. Your specific question regarding UHI, SIUC and UHI in 2019 produced a document, a proposal that looked at two things. One is maximising the full potential of natural capital in Scotland to support skills in the economy, and secondly, potential new working relationships and a potential unification merger with UHI. That was produced by Accenture, and if appropriate, convener, I'd be happy to share that with the committee. If I may take this opportunity briefly to respond to Mr. Mason's question, which is, of the 34 million capital that colleges get, SIUC receives just over 170k, which is why the transaction funding is so important.
Okay, well, thank you. It's very useful to know it. And is this circumstance as it stands, does this make it more likely that there will be a growth in the number of colleges working with their nearest university, or whatever, would that help both in actual terms of building their capability through the difficult financial circumstances that they both exist under?
I think the first thing is that we have to be strategic about this. And certainly we've spent considerable amount of time looking outside Scotland and looking at how, for example, agri-food universities have been built around the world. If you look at comparator countries to Scotland, certainly Scandinavian countries, New Zealand, the Netherlands, all are very powerful world-leading agri-food universities that have resulted from innovative partnerships, new ways of collaboration that allows funding to be and income to be diversified with business, with communities in completely new ways. And I think it is an important moment in time. It doesn't necessarily mean that colleges disappear, but we certainly need to be reimagining the way in which we work together and create new innovative mechanisms to support that so that it's forward-looking to meeting the new needs of the economy and of learners going forward. And I think this is the moment for us to be grasping that nettle.
Thank you very much. And Angela, yes.
Yeah, it's an interesting question in terms of colleges working with universities, because when you look at the skills needs across Scotland, it's technical skills that are required, and the bulk of those are delivered by colleges. So your engineers, your K workers, your hospitality and tourism workers, your net zero technicians for wind turbines and off-sea wind, those are the technical skills that colleges provide. So absolutely, we need the innovation and research that comes from our universities to support those new technologies. But the workers, in the main, come from the colleges in Scotland. And where appropriate, we should be working with our universities, but we shouldn't make the assumption that that will somehow increase the sustainability of the tertiary sector, or that will address the economic needs of Scotland.
Okay, and I can see Andy Whitty would like to say something.
Yeah, I mean, it was just building on Angela's point. I mentioned the £230 billion of potential investment. The figure for that is about 80% of those jobs are high-end technical skills, which is where the colleges come in. And so there will be collaboration. There's examples of that I can see round colleges already. The point about the funding for it's really key, though. There was transitional funding of £26 million, which was going to be received by colleges, and then before they got it, it was taken back to fund teachers' pay award. That £26 million would have been transformational for the colleges and been able to pivot to some of the ways they need to support the new skills and the new curriculum that's needed. And the other area that worked really well for colleges was the Flexible Workforce Development Fund, which again has been withdrawn in a recent budget. And that worked so well because it was given out with what's called the credit model, which is quite inflexible for when you're wanting to engage with business, particularly for short courses and bespoke courses. And that funding was used really well by the colleges, not just utilising the funding itself, but it also leveraged in additional funding once new companies got engaged with the college and realised what they could provide to help them. And so I think it's those sort of funds that are really important for colleges to be able to pivot and make the most of the opportunities that are coming in future workforce planning.
Okay, thank you. And Vicky, because I know that the circumstances in UHI is one of the areas that I pointed to. How's it work with yourselves?
I think it can work really well, and there are a lot of positives, especially when you can come together. Some of the markets are quite different, so some of our FE students are very much looking to learn a trade or go into the workplace to go and be a plumber or a heater or an engineer or a project manager. Degree students, unless they want something very specific, perhaps on the medical side, they are often looking for a different type of experience, so they want to get a degree or a graduate apprenticeship. I think where it works really well is where you can offer a very holistic curriculum, and it allows articulation from FE through to HE up to research and PhD, and we have some really great examples of that in UHI, especially for perhaps people who leave school and they don't feel academically gifted, that they want to come back to lifelong learning in later life, and certainly we see quite a lot of that. But they are quite different worlds, and the funding doesn't necessarily translate into a combined model. So at the moment, FE funding and HE funding and research funding are all very different income and funding streams. So one of the things we've been talking to the SFC about is how can we get some flexibility. So we know that certainly in our regions, we have over-demand for further education. And we're actively turning companies away at the moment. We think, based on current figures, that we could over-provide by between 10 and 15%. And we've actually got under-recruitment on higher education at the moment. So the ability in region to, via those funding streams, would be incredibly helpful, because it then links to the success and the sustainability of the region and economic development, regional outcomes. So for us, I think what would be really helpful is if we can link what any future model would look like to economic development outcomes, and then make sure that all of our colleges and universities are really supporting our communities and our business and industries, either in training the workforce for the future, or actually contributing to research and innovation. So, UHI and SRUC are already in that space, but as we've already talked about, there can be big levels of duplication when you sort of glue organisations together, because they do have existing structures. So the art will be in an agile model that offers an innovative solution.
Some positive messages from you all there, actually, and thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ross Greer.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, everyone. probably heard, as part of our Stage 1 evidence taken on the tertiary education bill, one of the more controversial bits of evidence was when one of the managing agents for apprenticeships confirmed that they take a 40% cut of apprenticeship funding. That came after the college sector evidence to that. So as much as we're now finished with Stage 1 evidence, this won't be contributing to the report on that, I do think it would still be useful to have it on the record. I would be interested in the position of colleges on how money in the apprenticeship system is best used, and your reaction specifically to the, in that case, confirmation that managing agents are taking a 40% cut. There have been suggestions that in some cases it might be as high as 60%. So I could start with Andy, if that's okay, for a sector-wide position.
No, thank you. I mean, the figures for some of the frameworks is for every pound that leaves Scottish Government, it's around 40% received by the colleges that actually undertake the training. There'll be managing agents and others in that 60% with that. I think there's opportunity to streamline that and to bring some more monies into the college sector, even within the current overall education and skills budget. The tertiary bill, we would support that, and we would support it because we see opportunities, and obviously the devil's always in the detail, but we would see opportunities in the apprenticeships being funded through SFC, and for it to form one collaborative funding model, which would need some work on that. But I think that gives the opportunity for additional resource to come into the colleges, which is really critical given some of the evidence you've heard this morning and previously. I think the important thing to think about with the tertiary bill as well is, if that didn't happen, where would we be? We would be with the status quo. And the status quo is 17% real term cuts. The status quo is only 40% of apprenticeship funding in some frameworks get into colleges. Things don't change. And so the tipping point that Angela touched on earlier, it just keeps hurtling towards us, if indeed we're not past that. And I think it was Withers himself that talked about being on a burning platform. And I know then, to deal with that, we need to do things at pace and we need to see things change. So we would be supportive of the tertiary bill. Thanks very much. So there's obviously a significant amount of money in the system to fund apprenticeships. I'd be interested from the position of principals and leaders of institution. Do you think that there is a better value way to deploy that money, whether it is around reform of the relationship with managing agents, more direct funding? Obviously, Andy's laid out the sector's position that it is best done through the SFC. Does anyone else want to come in on that, Angela? Thanks.
Yeah, so again, I'm not going to repeat what Andy said. I think we need to think about apprenticeships in the wider delivery and not as a siloed piece of provision. And certainly in Ayrshire, we could be delivering far more apprenticeships, and we find, because of the cap on apprenticeship numbers, particularly in engineering, we have students either staying in college on full-time courses because they can't get that apprenticeship place. We've got employers with workforce shortages because they can't get the apprenticeship provision. And unfortunately, due to some of the investments that have been made in Glasgow, it accelerates outward migration because people are seeking those apprenticeship places. So young people are leaving the region. So there's an opportunity with it coming under one funding allocation for colleges to be able to deliver on the needs of their region. And for me, I can see a future where actually we deliver more apprenticeships and less classroom-based learning for prolonged periods of time. I think the managing agent debate is an interesting one, and we really need to think about what the value added of having managing agents are. And there is some value particularly for small colleges or colleges who don't feel they have the capacity to deliver that full range of services around apprenticeships. That wouldn't be the case in Ayrshire, but I know from colleagues that we're debating all of that. So, and the other thing I would say is the free managing agents we have are delivering or leading on frameworks which are infrastructure and resource heavy. So our current resource that goes into colleges is offsetting some of the real delivery cost of colleges delivering that provision.
Thanks very much. I've got another question on industrial relations, but Wayne, if you're looking to come in on this first, that would be great.
If I may, Mr. Gray, I think just to very succinctly say that we've seen a 50% increase in our modern apprenticeships, and I think it's really important in the terms of the tertiary bill that you're shepherding through Parliament that we really ensure that there's more flexibility and that it's more as well aligned to what regional skills needs to drive productivity going forward. And I think in terms of our land-based engineering, in terms of our greenkeeping, there's a waiting list. So finding ways of accelerating that and being more agile and responsive to the needs is going to be really important, but it's certainly a growth area in terms of meeting Scotland's needs.
Thanks very much. I see Vicky and Joanna both looking to come in, so yeah, feel free. I'll condense my second question for the sake of time. I think this is useful. Vicky?
Thank you. Yeah, just to echo others really, what we're seeing certainly in the UHI regions is a huge demand coming from the sector, and we're also seeing a change in some of how our young people want to learn. They want to also learn a skill and a trade, but they also want to earn money whilst they're doing it to be able to get them started in life. So apprenticeships, whether they be modern or graduate, I think are absolutely critical going forward and will be a growth area for us. And the more funding and the more innovative ways we can do that in terms of varying funding streams would be really helpful. Like Professor Powell was saying, we're seeing big areas of construction engineering and healthcare where we actually want to grow in those areas and actually link in with companies and doing some fantastic work to feed that workforce and that pipeline.
And to oversimplify, potentially, quick yes, no, on whether the tertiary bill will improve the situation in the way that you're talking about?
I hope so.
Thanks. And Joanna?
Yes, just to say I'm supportive of the bill, and I don't want to repeat what others have said, but essentially it's about providing greater opportunity for students, apprentices, and also the employers as well. So my comment that I was really going to make was about pace, and actually, you know, we have the bill working its way through the various stages, but we also have wider reform that's happening, but we need to see a bit of pace injected around that as well, and linking it in with the economic transformation across Scotland as well. And just final point I was going to make, the 40% that you quoted earlier, certainly I recognise that, but also just to emphasise the point that some colleges are already managing agents and they've found a way to work through that, and that means that there's more, the money that's available for apprenticeships is going directly to those prospective apprentices, and also employers as well. So.
Thanks very much. Really, really useful. So I'll condense my second question because it's about industrial relations, which we could be here talking about all morning in the college sector. But really what I'm interested in is your thoughts on NGNC reform and the lessons learned exercises that we've been through. Certainly my feeling is that there have been a number of exercises now reflecting on the NGNC structure, process, outcomes, but particularly that last one, there's been a really, really long delay in getting collective responses, and we're still at a point where there's not really been much progress since then. So I'd be interested in any brief reflections you've got on, not on why everything that happened did happen, but how we move forward. Are there structural reforms to NGNC that you think would help, or are there the issues that would ease the industrial relations challenges separate to that? Obviously, ultimately this is about finances, but what I'm interested in is the machinery of industrial relations and whether improvements could be made to that. Don't know who wants to jump in first, Andy.
I'm happy to just say a little bit. I mean, there isn't a representative from College Employers Scotland on the panel who would be best speaking to that question. So we can provide you with additional information following this, if that would be helpful. I think the general comment I'd make is that where we are at the moment is that there has been positive progress made in college-industrial relationships recently. And I think that then does help set the scene to be able to do some changes that are required going forward. But I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add to that, but I would just leave as a general comment, yeah.
I'm happy to add to that. So I was a member of the Minister's Lessons Learned group that is set up to try and progress some of this forward. We had the Strathesque report that talked about how we may improve the national bargaining machinery, and one of those recommendations was about seeking an independent chair of that bargaining machinery. We are still keen to make sure that we progress with some of the most of the recommendations from that review, and at this point in time, we haven't been able to do so in a manner that we would like to be able to.
Is that because of a lack of unanimity from everyone who would need to be around the table?
Yes.
Thanks very much. Unless anybody else is particularly keen to come in on this one, I'm happy there, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pam Duncan-Glancy.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us, also for your submissions and for answering the questions so far. I want to talk a little bit about the model, the funding model, the new one, but also the historical credit approach. We've seen numbers of enrolments in colleges reduce from, in 2007, 308,000 to about 179,000, which is quite a drop. But we know we've still got skills gaps in Scotland, and we spoke about this a bit on the panel this morning. Can the panel make any kind of comments about why there might be that, and do they think there is any unmet need?
Start with that, and I'm sure the others will want to come in. So I think it was 2 years ago, Andy will be able to confirm that. The SFC dropped the threshold for credits that had to be delivered within colleges, and I think we need to be really clear why they dropped that threshold. It was because colleges couldn't afford to pay their utility bills and keep the light on at the height of inflation. That has meant that colleges have redesigned their curriculum, and as we've heard already this morning, the real-time cuts continue to happen. Increasingly across Scotland, we are hearing from colleges that there is demand for college places that we're unable to fulfil. But we also have a responsibility to try and balance the books. So in my own case, when we have raised with the SFC additional funding because we have over-delivered, we have been told that there's no flexibility within the model, and I understand that they also have to balance the books. So in Ayrshire last year, we turned away 764 students after interview with a single college region. A third of those students wanted to study STEM subjects, and some of the other students perhaps needed more of a bespoke programme that historically, before we lost about a fifth of our funding over the last few years, we would have been able to accommodate. That doesn't take into account the students that have applied and we haven't been able to interview, and the unmet cost of delivering new provision which really meets with the needs of our region. So I think we're at a critical point, and colleges across the country would be saying the same thing.
So what happened to those 700 people
well,
who wanted
unfortunately,
a place?
as I've said earlier, some of those students will have been lost to Ayrshire because they've gone elsewhere to either access an apprenticeship programme or they won't be engaged. And if you look at the statistics for Ayrshire, we have the highest levels of inactivity across Scotland, increasing numbers of young people not engaged, and 40% of the students that come to us in Ayrshire come from SIMD 10 and 20. 20% of those come from SIMD 10. So we are, in a difficult place.
Yeah, that paints a really difficult picture, particularly for your region. Joanna Campbell, can you maybe say something about Glasgow and in the same vein?
Yeah, I'm happy to do so. So I think I want to go back to something that Angela mentioned about the credit flexibility. So the Minister set up the tripartite group about 18 months ago, and one of the first things that group looked at was flexibilities around how we use our credits, which is our core funding, and a 10% leeway was afforded the group, not the group, all the colleges I should say. And actually what we'd been pushing for as a sector was a change to our funding model for a number of years. So this was to allow us to to address some of the financial pressures that we had, but also it was seen as the first stage of that migration to a new funding model. So on one side, there was the flexibility that was afforded, but it didn't suit every college. So if you're in a college where you have unmet demand, as Angela has described, then those flexibilities were not something that you were able to maximise. So just to give you a bit of context around my college, we did use some of those flexibilities and we did reduce our credits by 9%, and the result of that is that we have a 14% reduction in our student headcount. And we had to do that because of the financial pressures that were facing us. But the result of that is that we have, roughly speaking, 3 applicants for every college place. And some of those subjects, predominantly STEM subjects, where we see over demand for our places, and we are not able to provide college provision for those individuals. We also have huge pressure points around ESOL provision, and that's not just in my college, that's right across Glasgow. So, for example, we put on an ESOL, an extra ESOL course a number of weeks ago, and for 24 places we had 700 applicants within 24 hours. Now, we have had funding from the Scottish Government to put on more, the Funding Council to put on more ESOL provision, but it's never enough. So a real pinch point around ESOL provision in Glasgow.
And that's huge, a huge number of people to turn away. And just on the previous figure you mentioned about the three applicants for every place, does that mean you're turning two out of 3 people away?
Yes, and I go back to that statistic that I gave you earlier on, about 40% of our students come from SIMD 10 postcodes, so Glasgow Kelvin College operates in the north and the east of Glasgow. Those are the most deprived communities in Scotland, so we are turning away students who are looking to improve their life chances by coming to college. You
mentioned that you asked for a different model, but I think what was offered was effectively a kind of a cap on places, I suppose you would say, as a result of it. Would that be about right?
Yes, it suited some people, but not everybody. But I mean, the problem is that in order to change the funding model for the whole college sector, as the Funding Council themselves have described, there will be winners, there will be losers. So, ultimately, what we're pushing for as a sector is a review of all post-16 funding, because there are inequalities in post-16 funding. So, for example, in the school system, senior phase, 7.5k per student is afforded to a learner, whereas in the college system it's 5.5k. And then in the university, Andy will correct me because I'll get the statistic wrong, I think it's 8.5k per student.
And those figures are pretty stark. I mean, turning two and three people away from a college place, particularly in a region like Glasgow that needs the skills, is really counterintuitive and is a dereliction of responsibility, particularly to the students that you serve. Can I ask about the model then? How does the model recognise the differences in the student population across colleges? So, for example, the higher proportion of SIMD or students with ASN.
Can I defer to Andy?
Yeah. No, I can pick that up, and you know, just to confirm, it was the year 23-24 that the 10% reduction. So yeah, you were right, Angela. With that, and inevitably, then that's less students, and that was done to help colleges financially. But yes, you as funding reduces in general, you're going to see the impact on less students, which is what you see in the data. And I suppose I do go back to my first point, that colleges are around individuals being able to grasp those opportunities. And you know, you're hearing very stark evidence where colleges are not, despite their best efforts, are not able to do that. And so that does link into the funding model. We have been asking for a fundamental change to the funding model for a number of years. We have had some flexibilities given to the sector. There's been some changes made. I think we see that as work in progress. We want to see more change to it, and it's that more fundamentally looking at what it does and how it delivers. There's an opportunity as well with apprenticeships, if that does go over to the SFC, to look at how that is done. The recent changes that SFC have made have been to remove some of the premiums that used to be paid, group colleges into 6 different families based on size, and then pay a new premium that's the same for each college within that family. So the SIMD premium was one of those elements that was removed, and so there's implications as Joanna's seeing for individual colleges. But I'll keep my comments at a sector level rather than about individual colleges, because obviously I represent all colleges. But ultimately, what we've called for, and we put in a paper to the tripartite earlier this year about the fundamental review. It's really around giving college certainty, giving them autonomy, and giving them clarity around that funding. And there's various elements under each of those to be able to take hold of those regional opportunities that are presented to each college. I mentioned the flexible Workforce Development Fund earlier. That was an example where colleges were able to utilise that and grasp those regional opportunities. And we want to see a funding model continue to change so that it presents that picture for colleges to utilise it.
And would that model look more like the Flexible Workforce Development Fund than the credit model? Or is it both? I mean,
I don't want to prejudge where that might go to, but I think there needs to be a bit of both, I suspect. You do need a currency to actually measure with it, but I think some percentage of the funding as cash for strategic decisions to be made would help do some of that pivoting I talked about earlier and potentially that transformation. But I wouldn't like to prejudge what proportions or anything where discussions might go. Okay. But you know, you'll be aware there's a new chief executive at the Funding Council. She has said that she is keen to engage early in conversations about future year changes to the funding model. So we'll take that at face value and you know, look forward to working on this and being engaged in the conversations around changes and potential changes earlier in the process, which I think would be really useful.
Thank you, appreciate that. And Angela Cox.
Thanks for letting me come back in. I think we need to remind ourselves that the current funding model was established around having students in college for long periods of time, studying long, fat qualifications, we would call them. The future is around micro-credentials and short, sharp interventions and foundation-level skills that some of our students will still need, as Joanna and I have both said, where people are coming from the most disadvantaged areas in Scotland. The World Economic Forum has just published a document that states that 60% of all people who are currently working will have to be upskilled or reskilled in the next 5 years. That is the bread and butter of colleges. At the moment, we are unable to deliver that because we're stuck in a cycle where our funding model is based for efficiency on having large classroom sizes in a college premise for a long period of time. So as we think about the future and the transition that we require for our economy around skills, we need to stop tinkering around the edges and take a really fundamental look and a strategic approach to how we fund colleges moving forward. And that isn't, obviously we're always going to ask for more money. That isn't necessarily a huge amount more funding. That is about the flexibility within that funding pot for colleges to respond to the needs of their region. And the other point that we haven't highlighted, which again is not unique to Ayrshire, and every region in the country will have a similar but different story. We talk about the current demand and the lost opportunity of what we know, but what we're not thinking about and thinking about how this is going to be funded is in Ayrshire 1,500 shortfall in jobs, skilled workers in aerospace, a recent deal that will bring another 300 and odd jobs to aerospace, so that's 1,800, 3,500 jobs at Hunterston. These are all new jobs. And we're unable to satisfy the demand at the moment. So there has to be a mechanism, going back to your original point, that colleges can be resourced. It might not be for forever, to deal with that inward investment to upskill the workforce. In North Ayrshire, outside, I think, actually, the North Glasgow is the areas of highest deprivation in Scotland. The levels of inactivity are huge. So there's a real opportunity to transform that region with that inward investment. But we need to find a mechanism so that colleges can prepare that future workforce and get them into that job so that it's local people getting the local jobs. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Professor Powell.
Thank you for the question. I think Angela's essentially addressed the point I was going to make. I think, first of all, SRUC spans the university and college sector. I think there's some key principles perhaps that's worth reminding ourselves of if we step back from this. One is that the funding model has got to be learner and student-centric to provide the agility that we need going forward, given all the things that I know you've been hearing and is in the SPICE report about changing in demographics, the changing expectations of learners, the changing needs of the economy. So we need to have a system which is forward-looking, which is student-centric, and also allows universities and colleges to via money at different points to support the student going forward, the learner going forward. I think one of the things that is good on that context, the last thing we need is to be keeping learners and students in college or universities longer than they need to be. We need to get them out into the workforce as soon as we can to drive the productivity and, of course, to fulfil their own ambitions. If I may take one more minute, please, to say a little bit about SRUC's approach to that. Degree awarding powers for SRUC is fundamental to this. Because if we take the example of HNC and HND delivery, we have some very successful courses in terms of agriculture and horticulture, other courses in other disciplines of conservation biology where it's less appropriate and less attractive, and therefore by having degree awarding powers we can blend some of this in a different way, and we can allow students to come in and move out to work and come back again in a much more agile system. So I think it's about really, in terms of your fundamental question, that model has got to meet the learner needs and the needs of a future society and a future economy, and particularly in relation to, I think, the changing demographics that are taking place and are actually pretty stark for Scotland.
Thank you. And the government said, convener, just one final point. The government said they're optimistic that colleges can meet the economic demands of the future. I'm optimistic because colleges are doing some incredible work, including in my own region of Glasgow and Kelvin, site of Glasgow College, and Clyde College are doing great work. But the fact is, I feel like the government really has a dereliction of responsibility in this way. Can I just ask very short answers? Are you optimistic that the government is giving you the support that you need to meet the challenge?
I'm optimistic that the colleges can meet that demand if there's certain actions taken. I think in a previous appearance to a different committee, I used the word shackled for college sector, which got a reaction at the time. But I have noticed since then that the Minister himself has talked about unshackling the sector. So I think there's recognition that further changes are needed around that. And I think some of that is around we need to address the 17% real terms reduction. You'd probably expect me to say that. But there needs to be that clear commitment, I think, to halt that decline in funding and find a way to stabilise and then sustain the college sector so that it can take these opportunities. We've touched on streamlining around apprenticeships is another area with that. We've touched on flexibilities and the funding model around that. I think that parity of esteem, which is something that Withers picked up in his report, and we've already heard the figures around not comparable funding. So I think there needs to be something to address that. Now, that's not going to be addressed in a single year, but I think there could be the message sent that needs to be addressed to work towards that over a number of years. And I think there's something around that cross-party support as well. And I think as inevitably there'll be focus on as we go towards next year's parliamentary elections and manifestos, and I think it's that opportunity for all parties to include in their manifestos that support for the college sector so it can take those opportunities. I think is really key, and it's that narrative, I think, from politicians is really key as well, and part of it, that actually colleges should be there so that everybody has an opportunity to benefit from them at some point in their lives. Thanks.
So I'm optimistic. I think if I go back to the report that was published in 2000, the Cumberford-Little report, which clearly articulated the college sector's role in supporting economic growth. So, I mean, that report still stands today. The Minister set up the tripartite group, and some of the work beyond what I described, the initial focus is very much to try and find a route forward. But I go back to the point that I made earlier about pace. We have lots of reforms that are in train at the moment, but the pace needs to be, because of the crisis that we face as a sector, we need to see more pace around that. And if we look at the funding model as an example of that, we asked for pace. That pace has been slowed down. So my takeaway message in response to your question there was we need to see more pace injected around this.
Thank you.
I wanted to pick up on some of your comments, Angela, because I thought it was really important looking to other funding models. And I noticed, I don't have the figures to hand, but I think Ayrshire College has attracted around 40% of all private sector investment into the college sector. I think that's a partnership probably with Prestwick Airport. I'm wondering, that's a great opportunity for the sector to try to build those relationships where there's a different model which could be developed, because we are seeing at the minute the pressures on the educational sector, the university sector especially, and not money available from government. So I wondered where the panel felt there is a different funding model. You're obviously sitting with an education portfolio, whether or not economic development portfolio in this Parliament would be a more appropriate one for the sector, and to think a bit more radically about where the college sector needs to be on a parity of esteem with our university sector, not losing 100,000 places and seen as the poor relative, which I think after 18 years is what I draw a conclusion has happened. So I'll maybe bring you in, Angela, and then other members of the panel.
So, looking at my accounts, I don't recognise 40% of private sector.
No, sorry, I think that was in terms of all private sector investment, which has gone into the college sector in Scotland. That had been the most of it had been at Ayrshire College.
Okay, I'll need to go back and check that. So, there is a fantastic opportunity because colleges are regionally focused. So we are all over the regional economic strategy in Ayrshire, particularly the opportunities around Pressweek. We have managed to secure some funding from the Ayrshire Growth Deal to carry out what we call skill boosts. So that's taking people who are either unemployed or perhaps employed in a different industry and giving them the basic skills they require to get a job in the aerospace sector within 10 weeks. And we need to be doing more of that. But it's timed funding. That funding will run out. So I think the opportunity is around when we start thinking about growth deals version 2 or whatever they might be, or inward investment deals, that there is consideration given to how the skills will be met and the infrastructure that's required. So it's two things. It's capacity around how do colleges deliver that boost that's required for the inward investment, but also the changing need of technology and capital investment that's required. And I'll go back to if we had the flexibility within our funding to vary between apprenticeship, short courses, classroom-based delivery, all of that would really support us delivering to the economic priorities of our region. We've got another great example of XLCC, where we created a bespoke apprenticeship programme, pre-apprenticeship programme, and then supported the apprenticeships coming through from that. But the sustainability of that, when money becomes increasingly tight, is difficult.
So just to pick up your point that you made, I'm pleased to say that through the work of the tripartite group, alternative income streams is something that we are looking at, but it does present a number of challenges, as Angela has described. There is a lot of good work that's happened across the sector, and if we take some of the work that's happened in Glasgow around supporting the financial services industry, and very recently you have noted the £2 million investment in maritime skills. So these are good examples of where the college sector can support the economy, but also look at alternative income streams as well. But what you have to balance that against is a number of factors. First of all, the risks associated with that and the level of risk appetite that each individual college board will have. And we really need to be innovative in our risk-taking. And I would say that we're not all in the same place with regards to that. But the other factor that you've got to take into account here is our overhead. So to generate £1 million of additional income, we would need to generate a further 2 to cover our overhead. And I mean, these are just ballpark figures that I'm giving you here, but we do have a significantly higher overhead than perhaps the other private training providers, say, for example. But I'm pleased to say that it is something that we're looking at, and we did have a workshop yesterday with the Scottish Government and SDS to look at a model that has been implemented in the North East. So
I'll bring you in a second, Professor Powell. And you touched upon the North East, because I met with North East College quite recently to have a conversation over what will be a fantastic new campus they're opening around net zero and just transition. They will have to stick to their credit numbers, though. So any new courses they will offer there will have to come from the original courses they're running, which seems ridiculous, given the shortages, given the sector, actually. I believe there was a conference in the Highlands recently with the renewable sector to say these are all the shortages in skills we know are coming, but there's very little happening. So specifically around that model, because I don't know why the Scottish Government, given the skill shortages we are aware of, isn't providing that additional capacity or bringing the private sector in to help fund that with a different model, which just seems common sense, really. Professor Powell, I'll bring you in, and then yourself, Ms. Down.
Thank you, Mr. Briggs. Apologies for being impatient. I'd like to make a couple of points, and I know that Ricky wants to come in as well, so I'll be succinct. I think the point I want to make is that I think we need to take responsibility for the case for change. And I think we need to build up that narrative around that case for change. An example I can give you is the establishment of the UK's first tertiary vet school. So that is a disruptive, more radical model, to use your own vocabulary, but it's also building on the investment we get from the private sector in terms of our vet diagnostics and analytical services. So by pooling this together, we can create a disruptive model that can drive forward what is going to be important for Scotland's rural economy and farming in terms of generating vets who will remain in the rural sector, but also will have the resilience and also in terms of widening access.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a really clever piece of work that could be done, which is to take the regional economic development requirements, the National Economic Strategy and skills and workforce demand, say over the next sort of 5-10 years. You referred to the conference that we recently had up in Inverness that was organised by SDS, but was very much supported by UHI, by Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and the Inverness and Cromarty Green Freeport, amongst others. And what we had on that day was an incredible successful event that was attended by all of the main employers in the area. And they're really keen to engage because what they want is a pipeline of workers that they can then match to their own requirements. And we're working to meet that. The challenge that we have is that the funding isn't necessarily flexible to help us to do that. And certainly in terms of FE credits, as I mentioned before, we are already exceeding our credit target and we could do a lot more. And a number of institutions will be saying that as well. So it's a case of how that funding is cut to give everybody a share. But I think if we collectively as sectors could understand and have some engaging dialogue with the people who are planning the economic strategies for Scotland, that would be incredibly helpful, because then you can start to do all the clever things and fund them that will play into that. So if you talk about transformation, how do we move that forward? How do we create new courses and new curriculum that satisfy that workforce demand? And do that in a way that is enabling and actually drives economic prosperity in our communities as well. And especially where we have a lot of island and rural communities which are doing incredibly well, but actually want to do more, especially with aquaculture, with green energy. So again, how do we feed those pipelines? And we are looking at other alternative models, but that takes a little bit of time to development, where actually the employers want to see those skills now in the next 1 to 2 years, and we want to meet them.
Yeah. And sorry, Andy, did you want to come on that?
If I may, just come in on the back of that question. I mean, I referred to the Scotland 2050 conference recently, looking at what they wanted for Scotland by that year, and it didn't take long for the massive skills gaps that people anticipated and could see coming and happening. And we've talked about the level of inward investment, and I think there's a real opportunity that can be taken, but it needs to be strategically approached. It can't just be about trying to drive an increase in commercial income for colleges for the sake of it. Now, just so everybody is reminded, 75% of colleges' funding on average across Scotland comes from the Funding Council. So there's actually a need for colleges to derive additional income anyway, just to keep the lights on, just for the day-to-day activities. But I think the figure's about 6,000 welders are going to be needed in the Highlands and Islands region. It's around that. We know that the companies are bringing in foreign workers at the moment, yet there are capacity in colleges to train them, but the credit system doesn't allow them to do this. And this is where it ties into the earlier discussion about getting the right funding model, getting that right partnership and collaboration so that it can be done. And I think that is, it's not just through the education portfolio. I think there's the economy portfolio as well, that sort of multi-stream approach. There's areas where colleges can deliver on some of the health policy drivers as well. And so I think we can look at those different areas.
Yeah, thank you. And just finally, you know, I've been really taken by some of the success around school-college partnerships for younger people to get that taster. But some of the work the committee's been doing in relation to barriers to education, but also those furthest away from training opportunities. Now, we know we've lost over 100,000 college places. So for people who aren't going to university, aren't necessarily getting one of these college places, what does the picture look like now in Scotland to be able to offer these opportunities? And from what we've heard with credits, it sounds like that just hasn't changed and is only getting worse. So without me putting words into your mouth, wondered what that actually is looking like, because the models we have developed which have been successful to try to get people into university will need to start often with that college opportunity as well. And I'll maybe bring you in. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's yes, for many people, colleges will be, they will utilise that to then go on to university. For many others, the college qualification is what they're looking for, and that takes them straight into the workforce. I suppose there's a wider issue about addressing poverty here, because if somebody isn't going to university or college and isn't able to work, then there's real challenges and consequences of that. And you know, I think Scotland has a good safety net for poverty, if I can describe it like that. But the Scottish Government's own strategy for dealing with poverty is about then getting people through skills into good jobs. And I think it's that element of that strategy that's we need to, you know, see it through that lens for why there's a requirement for investment in the college sector as well, so that people can grasp those opportunities that are there to help lift themselves out of poverty and help those that find themselves in that place through no fault of their own.
I think we just need to be mindful as well that whilst we're still expected to deliver the same amount of activity to attract credits, in many colleges, I would say, if not all colleges, the areas that we've made efficiencies in is around the wraparound support that colleges provide students from the most disadvantaged backgrounds, and usually there's good reason why they come to college and they've not been successful at school. So you will know that we've had mental health funding reduced, but there's a whole myriad of wraparound support that colleges provide students which allow them to thrive over a period of time and go out and contribute successfully to the economy of Scotland. That is becoming more and more difficult. And when I look at the data around some of those students that we were unable to support at Ayrshire College last year, some of those students were in the margins because we were unable to deliver that wraparound support that would allow them to be successful.
I think, again, this is a really important point, and I think in many ways what we're dealing with here are intergenerational issues. and they're about self-esteem, confidence and ambition. To give an example, I was at prize giving at Oatridge College last Friday. The National Progression Awards, we work with 350 schools, where those National Progression Awards, in this case for horticulture, is doing exactly what I think you're referring to, is giving that optimism and hope that we really need to be generating as well in our young people.
Yep.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the support element for our students. So we're seeing an increasing number of students who need high quality mental health support, and that wraparound that colleagues have talked about. But not only that, but access to what we would consider basic necessities, such as breakfast clubs, cubbies for personal care items and for food. I was talking to a student at our nursing graduation last year who had a young family, had some difficult circumstances, and she was needing to make the decision about whether she continued her studies or whether she actually was able to afford to live. And she did continue her studies, but she was working 2 jobs, and without the student support that we offered her, she wouldn't have been able to continue. And I think there's a hidden element but none of us are fully aware of about how big that need is, and then the additional pressure that puts on institutions to make sure that we are discharging our ethical responsibilities in terms of looking after our students, because that's what we're here for. We're here for our students and to ensure that they have the best possible experience they can when they're with us.
Thanks for that. And I don't know, Andy, do you have a figure in terms of, and I asked this of the university sector, clawback, which the sector is currently facing from Scottish Government? I don't know if individuals have that figure for their own institutions or if there's a wider sector figure, because this is money allocated to deliver education and then government asking for it back. So just wondered what that figure looked like.
Yeah, we don't collect that collective figure on behalf of the sector. That would be the Funding Council that would see that overall broad picture. I think we do have a broad challenge around clawback when it's in year and the budgets have been fixed by colleges. They've got a lot of fixed costs around staff and buildings. So clawback in year is by its very nature hugely challenging then for colleges.
Yeah. Vicky, did you have a figure you could put on record?
Sorry, I've not jumped the queue, no. So in terms of UHI, in terms of further education clawback, we don't have any because actually we're overachieving. So clawback only applies when you've underachieved. So for us, it's on HE. So over the last year and this year, our expected amount would be close to about 8.5 million that will be recovered, clawed back by the Funding Council. And we've adopted a no clawback position for some time because what we'd like to do is take that money and invest it to able to build up and invest in our institutions, both the college sector and the university sector, to underpin transformation. So actually we can make the institutions better, which means we can succeed more. Now, up to date, the Funding Council have had a policy that they are pursuing recovery. They had a couple of years as a result of the pandemic where they didn't do that because they recognised that that was an exceptional circumstance. So we are in active dialogue, and I know University Scotland is doing a piece of work around clawback, I think, on the request of the committee.
Thanks.
So we have a provision for 32 students, probably around £234,000. I think the issue of clawback is really an issue of how we can adapt quickly to the new student demand. And I think what we've got to bear in mind in terms of that is the cycle it takes in order to get those courses in place, and therefore having some flexibility in terms of that clawback to adjust to new courses is really important. A good example for us is our new vet school with degree awarding powers, some of the other courses we're developing. That change takes time, and that during that change and evolution, that is where the criticality of this is. But to emphasise my previous point, we do not want to be keeping students in college or universities longer than they need to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyone else got anything they want to add? If not,
I'd just say I'm not aware of any colleges in Scotland that have had clawback, because in the main we're either delivering or we're oversubscribed, or they've been able to use that funding in a different way.
Yeah, that's helpful. And any data the Secretary could give us would be really appreciated. Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Willie Rennie.
If the rest of the panel will forgive me, I want to direct my questions to Professor Powell and the SRUC of a particular constituency interest, but I'm also interested in the wider organisation. Professor Powell, could you maybe set out the level of deficit for the institution and why it's increased in particular over the last year?
Good morning, Mr. Rennie. It's nice to see you again.
Yeah.
So our deficit for last year was 10.8 million. That 10 million reflects several things. One is the headwinds that all of the college and universities have been facing. It also reflects the fact that we've been investing in areas, some of which I've touched on earlier on. Our innovation centres across Scotland to drive regional economic growth and skills development. Our new vet school. So that deficit of 10.1 million for last year, we haven't had our accounts fully audited, but we anticipate that that deficit has been reduced to 5 million. And moving forward into this financial year, we anticipate to be close to break even and subsequently into surplus.
Okay. You're not subject to the same headwinds as a lot of universities because of the, I presume, the footprint that the other institutions have with the international student market. So I'm keen to understand why you've been affected to such a great extent when you've not been facing those that volatility in the international student market.
Well, I think in some ways it is, as you point out, Mr. Rennie, counterintuitive. We have virtually zero international students. Having just obtained degree awarding powers, we need to rebalance that into the future. If you look at our income, since 2017, SRUC's income has grown by 17%. And even last year, our income grew by just less than 1 million. So it's not just an issue of that income, it's the associated costs associated with running, as I described earlier, a really dispersed set of campuses. Not only have we got 6 campuses, we've got 26 consultancy offices, vet centres, so we have a number of pressures on us in order to be able to address that. At the same time, as I've tried to articulate to the committee this morning, this is a time when I believe SRUC, and I guess the sector as well, needs to adapt to new situations. And in order to adapt, we've got to be making those investments into the future. On the point of international students, yes, we are not in receipt of international student money. And as you know, our income streams are almost equimolar between education, which is from the SFC, and then 2/3 of our income comes from outside SFC. So that is from research and from commercial income. So we have a different portfolio and a different revenue stream. On international students, I think from memory, there's 74,000 international students in Scotland. Our plan is to access a small proportion of that international student market, and 1% of that market of approximately 750 students would be transformational, not only in terms of our funding and revenue, but I think in the cultural diversity it would bring as well.
So, what I get from you is the diverse estate, the large number of buildings, is a large part of the reason why you've got such a significant deficit. Is that?
Yeah, I think it is, Mr. Rennie, a big part of it. And I think that after our people costs, our capital costs are the second major OPEX cost. And I can provide a more detailed breakdown to the committee on that, if that would be helpful. I don't have all of those figures at hand.
So, I mean, the institution has existed since about 2012. Is that about 2012, that period?
Well, our forming institutions have existed for a long time prior to that.
Yeah. So why have you still got such a large footprint when the SRUC has existed for, 13 years or so? Why is that cost base still such a pressure on the organisation?
So this comes back down to, I guess, a fundamental question. And the fundamental question is, what is the expectations of SRUC? And it comes back down to our mission. And our mission, and if we go back to 2016, this was not the position. The position was, as I think you might be referencing, Mr. Rennie, is consolidating our campus estate on the Central Belt and in Edinburgh. What we've decided to do, that I've led, is a place-based mission where we retain our presence on various campuses and also driving a tertiary model alongside diversifying our revenue streams, as I've alluded to earlier on. So that's been a conscious decision because we believe that that place-based mission is so important to the tertiary model and so important to developing and supporting both anchor institutions, but economic development and skills development regionally.
To say it doesn't feel like that in Cooper.
Pardon?
It doesn't feel like that in Cooper with Elmwood campus.
And Mr. Rennie, we've had many conversations on this, and I'm delighted to continue this conversation.
Yeah, okay, good. Just to put the rest of the committee in position, in 2016, Fife College moved out of the main building of the campus, which I think was a reckless decision at the time, and it had a direct impact on your organisation. But that was 2016, and the building was half empty for that remaining period up until today, and you've now decided to close the building, and you've told us that it costs £1.2 million a year to run that building. Why has it taken so long to make a decision about that building when it was so expensive and had a detrimental impact on your finances?
I think that the answer to that question is that over this period we've had a number, I'm not going to make excuses about it, Mr. Rennie, but we've had a number of issues, including COVID and other factors that have contributed to that. But fundamentally, the attempt to sustain all of the courses at Elmwood, together with the running costs, proved to be impossible. And we've arrived at a decision now to close the main building to ensure that we can sustain our presence in Elmwood. I think that, to give context to the committee, what we are doing, we are closing 3 courses that represent 1 discipline. We are retaining 18 courses across 9 disciplines. So the decision to close the building is regrettable, but necessary in order for us to retain our place-based mission in Scotland.
Yeah. I mean, it is a shadow of what it used to be. I mean, we had about, at the peak, we had about 2,000 students at Elmwood, and it's now just a few hundred, and many of the courses are run online, so there's not actually a physical presence within Cooper. So for people in Cooper, the staff, the students, it feels like a shadow of what it used to be. And they don't have confidence in the organisation that there is a positive vision for the future. Right from the beginning, we've been asking for clarity and a positive vision for what's next. And I think we've just had drift and a series of cuts over time. The farm was sold off. The golf course was attempted to be sold off. The result, I think, of the indecision has meant the student accommodation has had to be closed because of the poor condition of them, and now the main building. And we're shrinking into the old Elmwood house, so it's a very tight space. It just doesn't inspire us locally, students or staff. So tell me, convince us at last that you're actually going to stay in Cooper with a positive vision for the future and potentially look to grow opportunities, because it's a major agricultural centre. We've got golf over in St Andrews. We've got many animal-based businesses in the community, but yet we just have drift and cut.
So first of all, Mr. Rennie, I fully respect your passion for Elmwood, and I share that passion. Let me give a bit of a picture of what our plans are for the future. Having obtained degree awarding powers in 2026, having gone through the various processes we need to, we'll be offering the first degree programme in Elmwood ever. That is going to be in sustainable golf. Now, you're quite right to point out that that will be through distance learning, but frankly, as we've all been saying this morning, that is what the future is going to be. We need to adjust and adapt to what students and learners and employers need. And being in classroom all the time isn't what we're going to be having in the future. The second is that a number of professional development programmes are being developed around ecological surveying to support data literate students going out to support the natural economy. We are, with our horticulture colleagues, developing a therapeutic horticulture programme. Could be quite... a number of important developments going forward, but the balance of students on campus and students doing distance learning is going to change. The demographics in your SPICE report show that over the past 20 years, we're getting almost a halving of the number of people in the age group of 16 to 24. What I think is important, if I may say so, Mr. Rennie, and if I draw a comparison to where we've been able to invest in other parts of Scotland, there's one really important component of that, and that is collaboration. Shared purpose and working together. And I would love to work with you in terms of moving that agenda forward in Elmwood. We recognise Elmwood as an important and essential part of our portfolio, and indeed our board will be meeting there in September, and I welcome your presence at that board meeting to share some of our plans.
You'll find a willing partner here, but there's some way to go to convince us. I mean, there was a vote of no confidence by EIS members of staff, not just Elmwood, but across the institution, and they voted overwhelmingly a vote of no confidence in the leadership of the institution. What steps how have you responded to that, and what steps are you taking to restore confidence?
So, let me just take that head on. First of all, in my tenure at SRUC, I've always maintained strong and positive relationships with the three unions that we have. And when the chair received the vote of no confidence on the 19th of May, a bank holiday, I immediately drove to Elmwood and I met with the branch secretary. Subsequently, the chair responded to the EIS union, and I followed that up and arranged several meetings with my senior colleagues and the branch secretaries to address their concerns and to put in place actions associated with that. And there were various things associated with that, Mr. Rennie. One of them is Elmwood.
Yeah.
But secondly, I think we've got to recognise in this conversation the levels of anxiety there is in the sector at the moment. And in many ways, our union leaders, to go back to Mr. Greer's question, are at the pinnacle of that. So this is an issue. I'm not ducking my responsibility as part of this, but there's a sector-wide issue around anxiety in our staff in terms of moving things forward. And we are committed to work with the unions as part of a constitution to take these areas forward. Of those 3 or 4 points that were raised, we're addressing them, and we're addressing them through engagement with the unions. Our unions are also on our board, together with the student representation and staff representation.
I don't want to push the tolerance of the committee, but one other issue. The staff feel that that you're more interested in higher education than you are in further education. I've seen you personally the most animated when you talk about the new veterinary courses, the disruption that you talked about earlier on, the disruptive course, but also the award, sort of degree award powers that you've secured recently, and congratulations on securing that. But those who are delivering FE courses feel left behind. They don't feel that you care as much or are as passionate about it. And they think, particularly in Cooper, with the home of golf on our doorstep, with a very strong agricultural sector, that there's just not the same passion from you about that. And they think they feel the effects as a result, that you invest, £12 million in Inverness in the veterinary facilities. You invest £2 million in Edinburgh at the King's Buildings in the heart of the university. You invest in Crebston quite significant sums of money, but the FE side just feels left behind. So tell me why they're wrong and why I'm wrong.
I would never dream to tell you, Mr. Rennie, you were wrong. I think that, first of all, in terms of leadership, you've got to be self-aware. And if this is the view and impressions coming through, then I'm clearly going to be responding to that. But just to give you a little bit of history, I started life as a PE teacher. So I've worked at all levels of education throughout my career. I think as well, to address one immediate misconception, is that a vet school is not all about HE. I will leave here stories of progression at SRUC. In there, you will see stories of progressions who are moving from FE into HND, into degrees that are being employed at SRUC and elsewhere, and the same applies to the vet school. So I'm passionate about a tertiary model. That is why I came to SRUC. That is why I'm appearing in front of this committee, because your role in terms of shepherding this bill through Parliament is critical. So I disagree that I'm only interested in HE. I'm interested in a tertiary system, and that tertiary system has got to adapt and adjust to the future.
Okay. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you. And I know as a former student you didn't ask me to contribute to that, but maybe my progression has not been as good as others who have gone through the SAC and SRC model. I'll take in John Mason there.
Thanks very much, Convener. And maybe just to continue where I was before, and you came in at one point, Professor Powell, with the point that you were only getting, I've forgotten the figure, 170,000, I think you said, from grants. Can I just pursue this point about the loans you're getting? I mean, presumably you'd rather have grants than loans. Are you able to get these financial transactions because you're a university, and it's not because of the college side wouldn't be able to get them? Is that correct?
We have been able to access transaction funding, and that transaction funding has been very helpful to us, and we've used and addressed those transactions, used that for a number of investments we've made. I'm not sure actually about whether the college sector is we have been eligible for them.
Yes.
We've been very grateful for the receipt of those transaction funding loans, and they have enabled us to address some of the issues that Mr. Rennie and others have referred to, and they are loans, and we welcome that type of investment.
Right. Can I ask the colleges then? I mean, are colleges able to get financial transaction money?
No, they're not, is the short answer to that. Technical reasons of why the university sector can have them, but we have asked that and they're not available to the college sector.
I assume that's because you count as being in the public sector and they have to go to outside bodies. Yes,
it would go onto the government books effectively as an additional loan, which it can't. They can't do.
No, financial transaction money can't do that. That's okay. That kind of clarifies that a little bit. That's helpful. Thank you. Coming back to yourself, Professor Powell, I mean, it's a kind of minor point, but I was looking at the accounts for all three institutions which are here today. Yours are to the 31st of March. Everybody else I see is July. Can you explain why it's March?
It's a very good question. This is an historical position. We're just in the process now of changing our end of year to the July, so that we're aligned to other HEIs, and that's an historical position, and we are changing this year, this financial year.
That's good. That's probably going to make it easier for everyone. In part of your submission, you say SRUC received support over 2 years from financial year 24-25 with a £5 million advance of income, a deferral of £2 million in financial transaction loan repayments. Additionally, £8 million of loans were repurposed to support immediate cash constraints. One or two points in there struck me as a little bit unusual. I mean, financial transaction money, I mean, that would still have to be repaid, even though you've used it for short-term purposes?
Yes, so the transaction funding that I referred to in my submission is that the transaction funding is restricted funding. It is destined for a particular purpose. What we were able to do last year was to make a submission to the Funding Council to request that funding allocation could be converted from restricted to unrestricted funding. We made that submission to SFC, which went through the appropriate boards and of the Funding Council to ensure that it addressed the specific requirements, and that was granted last year.
So, in answer to earlier questions, you were very optimistic that you're moving from a deficit to a surplus. And I mean, out of interest, who looks at the detail of that? Because, as you may know, we've been involved with another university, and they assured everybody that they were cutting costs, but it turned out they hadn't. I mean, is your audit committee, court, finance committee, are they all active looking at this kind of issue?
Very much so. Our board are very much engaged with this, both the F&E committee, the audit risk committee, and the whole of board. We have a very thorough process in place to ensure that our budgeting process is rigorously pursued, and indeed we brought on new board members recently with further finance, audit and risk skills. Okay, that's great. Ms Campbell, if I can come to you, also looking at your accounts. I mean, yours are a wee bit scary because in August 22 you had 11 million reserve. I mean, you've also got revaluation reserves, but if we leave them out, your restated income and expenditure reserves dropped from 11 million to 4 million at July 23 and 1.3 million in July 24. That's a bit of a concerning picture. I know you're new to the institution. Where are we going on that?
Okay, so you're correct. And actually, my predecessor came to this committee and spoke about the financial challenges that the college faced. What I can tell you is that in 21-22, the board approved a 5-year budget, and we developed a college operating plan at that time, knowing that we were going to have a £1.2 million deficit in the following financial year. But what I can tell you is that the executive team at the college, along with our trade union colleagues and the wider staff base as well, we have worked tirelessly to reverse that position. So in 23-24, we have generated a slight surplus, bearing in mind that colleges are not allowed to carry surpluses over from one year to the next. But the way that we've addressed the financial challenges that we faced was by looking at our operating costs line by line and reducing those. We ran a voluntary severance scheme, so we have reduced the workforce by just under 24% over, well, since 2019 actually, so it was an ongoing process. We've also looked at vacancy management, and we've also sold one of our campuses, so we sold the West Campus. And as I mentioned earlier on, we're in discussions with Scottish Government about the volume of capital that we can retain from that. We are in a better position from a cash perspective, so our liquidity is better than most now, I would suggest. So we've gone from 9 days cash to 15 in 24-25. So it's an improving position, days. It's not great, but it's better than most colleges.
Okay, well that leads me on to either Mr Whitty or Ms Cox. Is that a typical picture of other colleges? And, you know, is there a danger that a college basically goes bust?
So, if I give you a little bit of context around Ayrshire, so cash trading days by the end of this year, 24-25, will be down to 7 cash trading days.
So that means that you've only got cash for carrying on 7 days?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes. And because of some of the changes in funding that were made last minute with the SFC If we take no action within next academic year, we run out of cash by July 2026.
Okay. And that is, again, typical, Mr Whitty, of colleges? Are they all in a similar kind of space?
So each college will be in its own unique position, but looking across the sector, I'll just take the committee back to the SFC report that was produced in January 2024, which, looking ahead, forecast that the sector as a whole by July 2026 would have a cash deficit of 4.2 million. So that's across the sector. And obviously, each college is in a slightly different position in regards to that. That's if no action is taken. So the latest set of financial forecast returns, the FFR returns, are due, I think, the end of this month from colleges to funding council. So that will allow them to see if the trajectory that they predicted back in January 24 is correct or not. I think the SFC, have stated in previous committees that they're working in close engagement with 4 colleges, 6 colleges around it. So you can see the picture that is emerging, that is where the sector is at because of that 17% real terms reduction in funding over the last 3 years.
And could a college get into the same situation as Dundee University, where it just basically has to come to the SFC and ask for a chunk of more money? Or is it because there's a different way of doing things? Can we be sure that that won't happen?
I mean, I'm happy for individual colleges to talk about it on that level, but yeah, my understanding is that the SFC continues to have close engagement with colleges throughout the year.
Now, maybe this is unfair, but closer than they had with the universities, because frankly, with the universities, we got the impression that the SFC sat back until the university told them they had a problem. Do you think they're more involved with colleges?
I think because colleges, we're operating hand to mouth generally. There's more regular dialogue with SFC in terms of our funding and how we draw down our funding. And there have been colleges in the past, I'm not sure if that's still the case, where they have drawn down funding ahead of use in order to support cash flow. So I think the relationship is quite tight between the SFC and colleges.
Well, that's slightly reassuring. And University of the Highlands and Islands, I mean, your accounts actually look healthier, but I think you've told us that there is a deficit, or there would be danger of a deficit coming up, because your reserves were quite low at, is it 600,000, then went up to 4.4 million, then 9 million. So that's reasonably positive.
Our university court has set a cash balance limit of 6 million, which we won't go below, and that equals 75 cash days for us. We're seeking to increase that as much as possible. I think, just to answer your previous question with regard to the interaction with the SFC, we work really closely with the SFC. It's one of the things since I took up my role that I was really keen to do. So all institutions should be making regular returns to the SFC, but I think we also need to be proactive in fostering the relationship with the SFC, so that actually we're letting them know if there are any issues, or if we think that there might be a problem coming forward, because we're very much aware that the SFC will be in a reactive position. So we meet with the SFC roughly every 2 weeks and just have a general catch-up to talk about issues across the partnership as the regional strategic body.
I mean, as has been said already, you're quite an unusual structure.
Yeah.
I mean, Edinburgh University told us that they've got different schools, and they basically had been allowing the different schools to just do their own thing, and then eventually realised there was a problem and pulled it all together. You're in a slightly different position, but I note in your submission you say that, if one college has a surplus and another has a deficit, you do not have the powers to move that surplus. And that's something you'd like to have the power to do that?
We don't at the moment, because each of the colleges are independent companies in their own right. So depending on their format, they may or may not be able to carry a surplus. So we would seek the SFC guidance for that in terms of treating any surpluses. But there are very few surpluses at the moment, Mr Mason. It's generally, if a college can break even, they're in an exceptional place. We've got one college at the moment within the partnership that's breaking even, which is UHI Argyll, and most others are in a deficit position, and there's various reasons for that. Some might be in-year pressures, others might be a deficit with a growth strategy attached, as Professor Powell was talking about. So it is a really complex picture with lots of competing priorities in terms of income coming in and expenditure going out.
And would it be easier to manage if it was a more centralised model with less powers in the colleges?
I think I'm very wary about the word centralised in terms of UHI, because we value our basis in communities and being there. But I think one of the things we're really keen to do as part of our view forward is to focus on where we can share services and have more integrated services, which would give us a single view. So at the moment we have, I think it's 7 different finance systems across the partnership, none of which talk to each other. So to have a single finance system, for instance, or a single HR system that we can all share would give us a lot more information and a lot more data-led approach. And there's no doubt that the complexities we have in UHI are expensive and also are more than ripe for change and innovation. So that's really why we're looking towards transformation at the moment.
So what do you get at the centre? Do you get monthly accounts from each college or something like that?
We get regular reporting from each college. We do quarterly accounts, and we often meet with monthly. Our Chief Financial Officer meets with the finance directors of each of the colleges, and then, as I explained earlier, the academic partners' financial sustainability is scrutinised at every finance and general purposes meeting and every court meeting as well. There's a lot of scrutiny in our organisation on financial sustainability, quite rightly.
Okay, thanks so much. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Just because there's a little bit of time, can I go back to Mr Mason was speaking there about the kind of unique setup with UHI? I mean, is there a future with the Regional Strategic Board? Should that continue, or should we look to replace it? It's now the only remaining regional board in the college sector in Scotland.
Mm-hmm. I think that the RSB, Regional Strategic Body, and UHI and the university are inextricably linked, and it would be hard to separate one from the other at the moment, because we manage all the funding, and that is a legislative position. I think we've had a number of discussions, certainly over the past 18 months, and we produced an outline business case in terms of change to say what could the future for UHI be, and we've had unequivocal support that actually for an area that covers 2/3 the landmass of Scotland, that having a university in that area is absolutely critical. The key for me is how is that university structured, and how is it funded as we move forward. And there has to be a more elegant solution than we have at the moment, which is an unfunded regional strategic body, because we don't get any extra funding for the regional strategic body, and then the separation between the university and our various academic partners, some of which sit in a local authority, for instance, so UHI Orkney. So what we want to do over the next sort of 6 to 8 months is to look at a number of models, and obviously these will be subject to trade union, staff, public consultation, to say how can we preserve all the great things about UHI, and there are many, but actually how can we create a forward-thinking institution that meets the needs of its communities for the future. And that will mean different funding mechanisms and possibly a different structure, but I don't know the answers yet, because we are in the process of commissioning the work.
I'll come back to that. Mr Rennie put the charge to Professor Powell that he was more interested in HE than FE, and that is a criticism that's felt through the organisation, and Professor Powell responded to that. A similar accusation has been made about you and the court, that the university, and your answer there was very much about the university and how we need a university in the Highlands and Islands. Is there that charge then that you care more about the university side of UHI than the colleges who are delivering what we've heard colleges need to deliver, and indeed there's great demand for at the moment?
Not at all. I mean, the reason I talk about UHI as a university is we are a tertiary university partnership. We were given degree and research awarding powers in 2011, and I'm really proud of that. And I talk about it in a holistic sense. So within UHI, our diversity is our strength, and the fact that as a learner, as a student, you can come to UHI and undertake an FE course or a short course. You can then continue to a degree and onwards, and we have students who do that. So I will reflect on your comments. I haven't heard that particularly myself, but certainly for me, having a tertiary university partnership based within our regions is a really powerful thing. And what we need to be doing as the leadership and the court and all of the people within UHI, and we have some fantastic people within our organisation, is saying, this is where UHI is now. What's the next stage of its evolution? What does that look like? And that's why I think the work of this committee will be really helpful in doing that, because the model that we have at the moment doesn't work. It is a legacy model. We've talked previously about the funding mechanisms, and what we want to do is understand how we integrate that better. So we're in receipt of funds from the Funding Council at the moment. We've completed stage 1, which is an outline business case, and then we'll move to a full business case. But I'm also very aware that UHI is held really passionately by the communities that have UHI in their areas. Because for a long time, if you wanted to undertake education, higher education, or and sometimes further education, you had to leave, you had to go away. So actually our network provision allows you to be in Shetland accessing a course in another academic partner. So it's a really powerful model, but actually this is about the evolution of where we go next. And linking into what others have said, I think the funding climate is going to remain really challenging. And so institutions have to be innovative, and that can often mean some difficult decisions. But in order to move forward, we have to be, because we've got economic development on our doorstep, we have employers and industry crying out for skilled learners. So how we address that as an institution and how we harness the power of UHI and our 36,000 students is fantastic. So we were voted first in Scotland for postgraduate taught education, 6th in Scotland for undergraduate satisfaction, and 72% of our research is classed as internationally significant or world leading. So we don't want to lose any of that, and what we want to do is actually take it forward for the next generation. But it is a complex, knotty problem in terms of the structure.
The other kind of complex problem is this regional strategic body. And am I right in thinking before that we had the Further Education Regional Board?
The FIRB board, yes.
Yeah. Now, an SFC review of UHI regional strategic body in 2020 outlined a number of differences. So is it correct that the FIRB, the Further Education Regional Board, had an independent chair?
I believe so. It was before my time with UHI. That board doesn't exist any longer. It was replaced by a partnership forum, which has a sort of different focus. That's more looking at key issues within the partnership.
So one, it had an independent chair, and there was that delineation then from the wider college. And I understand that the chairs of the 9 assigned colleges were part of the Further Education Regional Board. So how many of the chairs of the regional colleges are on the regional strategic body?
So the regional strategic body, in terms of University Court, has 2 chairs at any one time with the option to include a 3rd chair. What we also have started doing, and it's really in the move towards better and more integrated partnership working, is each court meeting we invite a partner chair to attend. The partnership forum meeting that I mentioned earlier is all of the chairs and the chair of court coming together to discuss strategic issues across the partnership. And in addition, the chair of court has regular one-to-ones with all of the chairs of all of the colleges. I chair the partnership council, which is myself and all of the principals of all of the partner colleges, and then there's regular one-to-ones that happen between myself and principals. So,
can you understand there is that concern, though, that we've lost some of those voices when all 9 chairs used to be on the predecessor board? That's now 2 and maybe a third invited. And there isn't the independence now that the chair of the court chairs the RSB, whereas it used to be an independent chair. Therefore, you know, if the leadership of UHI wants to get something through, they can now do this with the regional strategic body really rubber stamping that, and there's less opportunity for that dialogue, debate and perhaps change coming from the colleges.
The FIRB, and as I say, it was before my time, but the FIRB wasn't the regional strategic body. So the regional strategic body has always been within court's remit. And as far as I understand it, the court composition hasn't changed since it was formally established.
But without the FIRB, there's not that opportunity that the 9 chairs had with an independent chair to make their points.
I think there is the opportunity through the Partnership Forum, and in my experience, you know, the chairs are very, very good at voicing their opinions and making their views known. In terms of actually how we work together. And I'd say that's stronger now than it ever has been. We're constantly reviewing our structures to see what we could do differently, what we could do better. And I think one of the things that I've been doing since I came into post is really trying to take a more inclusive approach to the partnership and a more collaborative approach. And an example of that is the 2030 strategy that we have. That was agreed by all of our principals and all of our chairs and all of our academic partners. That hadn't been the case in the past. In the past, that would have been done by executive office. So we are moving that. I'm not saying it's perfect, and we'll continue to evolve. And I think one thing that we need to develop as part of a new operating model and the work that we're doing now is a different composition to the university court. Yeah. You know, we need to have that more inclusive approach because it has to reflect our partnership. And we're currently trying to understand is how do we also get those community and regional voices so that we understand, and it's especially important for rural and island communities, that how they have their place and their voice is heard. So I expect fully that the composition, the governance structure, if you like, will also change as we move forward into evolving to whatever the future looks like.
Well, that is very interesting, something I welcome, because is that then an admission from you that you're not inclusive enough at the moment? If the court has to change to be more inclusive, as you just said, does that not then suggest that you're not inclusive enough at the moment?
No, I think we're really inclusive, actually, and more inclusive.
So why do you need to get more inclusive?
I think it's your point, convener, that actually as we move forward, some of the structures that we've had in the past need to change. So at the moment, I and myself, but other colleagues, do a lot of work making sure that we are as collaborative, as inclusive as possible. What would be nice is if our formal structure that was set up down in legislation also reflected that. But in the meantime, we are doing a huge amount of work in making sure that our chairs and our principals feel that they have a voice and that there is active and constructive and participative dialogue across the whole of UHI, despite its complexity, because it is a complex beast.
So about that dialogue, I mentioned earlier about the transformation plans, and I mean these have been ongoing now for several years. People on the ground tell me they've not seen much change. There's a lot of talk, there's some papers produced, but interestingly in your point about dialogue, I've had a lot of criticism that boards, individual staff members, very skilled staff members with a lot of experience in UHI have submitted proposals and they feel they are not taken on board by yourself, the chair or the court. And indeed, in some cases, they felt the chair just replied to say thanks and nothing really happened. So how do you answer the concerns that, despite saying you want this dialogue, it doesn't really follow through with changes to the transformation plans?
Well, I think I'd be happy to look at any specifics. Certainly one of the things I try and pride myself on is going back to people and having a conversation if people do make proposals for improvement. And we're doing that all of the time. I can't comment for the chair, but from what I know of him, he would be very much in that space. and very much trying to foster that open dialogue. I think, I joined UHI in 2022 and immediately started working with colleagues in 2023 on a new strategy, one that was reflective of our partnership, and that was really the catalyst for change. So our 2030 strategy talked about our mission and our vision. We were created to have a transformational impact on the communities and economies of our region. And we also agreed as part of that strategy to think, plan and act as one. So that was really the start of the change process in 2023. Since that time, we have collectively, across the partnership, developed an outline business case, which sets out the current position. That was approved by all parts of UHI in December, at the end of last year, and then we've started working on a full business case. So for a very large tertiary organisation, I think we've made really good progress since 2023. But I also think you're right in the fact that all institutions exist on this burning platform of sector funding. It's getting difficult. There are more costs coming in all the time and less income. So we are actively looking to see how do we speed that up. But we recently had staff engagement sessions. I chaired a lot of them. We had a huge amount of staff attend those. We've launched an employee survey and also, a lot of feedback from staff. But I'd be happy to speak to any colleagues who feel that they would like to have that conversation, but I'm not aware, convener, of anybody who I've turned away or haven't listened to.
That's very helpful, and I know a number of them are watching today, so we'll hopefully take you up on that offer. It's been suggested to me that the transformation project is not Green Book compliant.
We are working through the process, the next stage. The outline business case followed the sort of standard business case. The next stage, the full business case, will be, as you say, Green Book compliant as we move forward.
So maybe not up to this point, but we'll be going forward.
Well, we'll be following the general principles, yes, and the Funding Council have been content with that work. So on the basis of the outline business case, they agreed to fund the full business case, and they've been very clear with us what they expect to see, and for any future change, obviously that would need funding, and they are very rigorous, I will advise, in their scrutiny of any documentation that we produce. And they also sit on our various change governing bodies. So we have a Transition Executive Board, which is at a working level, which I chair with partner principals. We have an Oversight Board, which is chaired by the Chair of Court, and the Funding Council sit on both of those groups as an observer.
And just finally from me, we've heard from other witnesses today the challenges around capital, and someone who comes from Murray, we are particularly worried about Murray College. It is older buildings. There has been limited investment, and indeed, some of the classrooms have had to be closed, people moving offices and such like. There's a worry that there's just a general lack of investment to make it easier in the future for UHI to say, actually, despite our best efforts, Murray College cannot continue. It would cost too much now to either upgrade the current building or to build a new one. Therefore, students can go elsewhere. It's only 40 miles across to Inverness. What would you say to dampen those concerns and hopefully remove them completely? Because Murray needs the students going there. We have very good outcomes from those who study at Murray College, outstanding staff led by David, the principal, who is doing a great job under very trying circumstances that we've heard all principals are working under at the moment. But can you give a guarantee that there will always be a UHI Murray College in Murray?
That's certainly our intention. One of the things that we've stated in all of the documentation that we produce is that communities are at the heart of any change. UHI was founded to be based in and for its communities, and that doesn't change. So yes, absolutely. What I can't give you a guarantee about is that there will be government funding for capital investment and change. And I know UHI Murray is struggling with a major RAC issue at the moment, and they're currently understanding the cost of that and the size of it. But capital funding in general is a major issue for all sectors, because some of the mechanisms that we had in the past and some of the funds that we had in the past that we could bid into, they don't exist any longer, or they're so small that you get a slice of a very small pie. So one of the pleas that I would make is that, linked to some of the other things that we've done, that there is capital funding made available, because unless you're fortunate and you have a new college building, actually a lot of the old colleges, and you know, our building is 20 years old. We also have maintenance issues. You know, time continues to move on, and unless organisations can carve out of already pressured funding capital funds, it is really difficult to make funding available.
I'll take in Professor Powell, because I think you want to come in. I fully agree with that. However, to go back to my initial questions to Andy Whitty, the Minister, when he was in front of us, said that the position that Colleges Scotland adopted at the outset of the budget was to make asks that many people would have considered unrealistic by any judgment. But they were largely asked about capital. There was a big request for capital there. So I think that has to be heard by government, because otherwise we're going to have these buildings getting in a poorer and poorer condition. Professor Powell.
Thank you, Convener. I've been reflecting on Mr Rennie's fair challenge, and I think what I think is important with respect to that, and something that we would appreciate the committee's support on, is University College title, which really emphasises the importance of having FE and HE together. And I think for SRUC that would be a really important step in terms of moving this agenda forward.
Okay, thank you. That is noted, a helpful suggestion, and I'm very keen to end on a positive response for the future of Murray College as well, from the Principal and Vice-Chancellor. Could I thank you all for your time with us this morning. You will be aware that we had a session with universities, individual universities and University Scotland, now colleges and Colleges Scotland, and it's our intention when we come back from the summer recess to have a discussion with the Ministers about the situation, financial sustainability for both the college and the university sector. So your input today and your written submissions is extremely helpful with our endeavours going forward. So can I thank you again for your time, and I will the committee will now move into private session to consider its final agenda items, and I suspend the meeting for 15 minutes.